On Tuesday, November 1st, Saudi Arabia warned of a potential outlash from Iran to take place on Thursday. The next day, North Korea launched over 20 missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles. Iran denied any plans to attack the Saudi kingdom, and ultimately nothing happened. South Korea and the United States have responded to North Korea with their own missile drills in retaliation. Iran and North Korea having spats with Western countries is nothing new. In fact, I'm sure many people just roll their eyes at this point. But this time is different. Both of these events have hit worryingly new peaks simultaneously. On top of that, the United States is probably in the worst position in regards to power projection it has been since the 1970s. It raises serious questions as to what would happen if war were to break out in both locations. Would the United States be able to project power in both locations sufficiently? Historical background. Following the Cold War, the North Korean state wanted to reunite with the southern state under its own control. At this time, North Korea was propped up economically by China and the Soviet Union. It was a far more advanced country than its southern counterpart. Following the Korean War, North Korea was able to recover very quickly. An ideological shift occurred as Kim Il-sung ended the 5-year planning system adopted from the Soviet Union and shifted towards consolidating power to the government. After stagnating in the 80s, South Korea overtook its northern counterpart economically. The 90s wouldn't fare better, as the Soviet Union collapse ended economic aid to North Korea, followed shortly by a famine that caused mass starvation. During World War II, Iran housed German troops and resisted British calls to expel them. The British and Soviet Union promptly began an invasion that went well, with Reza Shah quickly backing down. With the northern territories taken, a new supply route and an influx of oil was presented to the Soviet Union to utilize against the Germans. After the war, the Soviet Union kept the northern territories, establishing puppet states. However, these states were overthrown quickly once the Soviets left. In 1951, the Prime Minister nationalized British-owned oil production companies, prompting an Anglo-American response that ousted him in favor of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in 1953. For the next 20 years, he would secularize and modernize the nation, imaging it after European counterparts. While it led to an improved quality of living, the 1973 oil shock led to uncontrollable inflation. During his reign, Mohammed was also known for using his secret police to suppress political opposition. Fearing the country was becoming a puppet state for the West, Shia critics overthrew the Shah in 1973, creating modern-day Iran. Since the Islamic Revolution, the country has been extremely alienated from the global economy, and thus, like North Korea, survived with a mostly self-sufficient economy. The setup. The Iranian regime is in a precarious situation as it has mismanaged the economy of Iran for the better part of 40 years now. Discontent has been present among civilians for decades now, as better-paying jobs are only available through foreign avenues. The Iranian regime has also used force to quell discontent, much like Mohammed did beforehand. As a result, brain drain is a significant problem, as people who have talent leave the country in order to be properly compensated for what they can offer. Coupled with the increasing isolation of the country economically due to the Islamic Republic's foreign policy, the country's citizens are fed up with the current ruling body. This reality heightens the risk of conflict for the simple reason that the uncertainty of conflict entices people to tolerate current leadership in the pursuit of stability. Nearly every United States president has served both terms during a conflict, and Putin consistently starts a conflict during any time of civil unrest within Russia. North Korea finds itself in a similar situation. Its people are malnourished, the electrical grid is non-functioning, the government stagnates economic potential, and is extremely isolated economically. However, the government has a much tighter grip as it regulates all information within the country. This only works for so long, however. One of the problems Kim Jong-un faces is the illegal crossing of the border to the north into China. Recently, China discovered tunnels used to smuggle goods like food and cell phones into North Korea. Residents also use it to flee the country into neighboring Asian countries. One can only guess as to the level of discontent held by civilians, but there has to be a breaking point eventually. After the economic collapse, famines, and COVID, perhaps there are signs eternally of discontent that are pressuring Kim Jong-un to be more aggressive. The stark parallels. During both the Vietnam and Afghanistan conflicts, the United States dominated militarily. However, it completely failed in establishing a stable, competent governing body to secure its exit. As a result, the North Viet Cong rushed to the south, quickly taking it over as the U.S. exited. The U.S. tried to avoid the same mistake again in Iraq and Afghanistan. While having somewhat better luck in Iraq, Afghanistan proved too difficult as the majority of the population were tribes that had no interest in uniting. After 20 years, Joe Biden took office and withdrew all troops from the country. This resulted in the Taliban hiding in Pakistan to rush back into Afghanistan, taking billions of dollars of military equipment, quickly defeating the Afghan military, and establishing a brutal totalitarian regime. Both of these conflicts mirror each other, and that is due to some crucial similarities. Both countries have tremendous defensive advantages, as both their environments feature difficult terrain. The jungles of Asia or the deserts of the Middle East, both are completely opposite but equally brutal to operate in for different reasons. Both forces focused heavily on asymmetric warfare. Instead, they would avoid direct conflict for the most part, choosing to focus on the resolve of their opponent through small-scale attacks at low risk. Both Iran and North Korea are mountainous, with Iran being a desert and North Korea being a forest. Both countries are set up overwhelmingly in a defensive posture, as neither can afford symmetric warfare strategies. Iran's offensive capabilities mostly stem from extremely low-cost but effective use of explosive drones. North Korea's offensive capabilities include digging tunnels under the DMZ to move commandos into action, and an undisclosed amount of artillery. Both offensive capabilities are dependent on the range of the weapon itself, offers minimum power projection, but do pose significant threats with a low cost of procurement. Iran focuses its air defenses on the northeast of the country, where the majority of the population is surrounded by mountains, with the west being open desert, devoid of resources. The country operates many airframes, from 1960s American equipment to 1980s Soviet equipment, including but not limited to F-14A Tomcats, F-4 Phantoms, Su-24s, and MiG-29. Due to the cost, it's probably more important to look at their surface-to-air defenses, which includes overlapping coverage of SA-2s, S-300s, and SA-11s. North Korea has mostly Soviet equipment from the 1950s up to the 1980s. It uses IL-28s and Su-25s for ground attack, and MiG-21s and MiG-29s for air defense. Like Iran, the cost of maintaining a competent air force is likely prohibitive, so North Korea also focuses on ground-based air defenses, creating the densest air defense network on Earth as a result. This network is made up of SA-2s, SA-3s, and S-200s. While antiquated, forested mountainous terrain and the level of overlapping coverage means it still poses a significant threat. North Korea also invests heavily into underground construction, likely learning from Japan and Vietnam. Numerous air bases have underground components, and many tunnels have been built to move troops and supplies. Mountains near the DMZ have some 800 bunkers built into them. Artillery that threatens Seoul is stored into underground bunkers as well. There are even 2 air bases with runways going through the mountains. The scenario. Outside of the Iran-Iraq War in 1980, North Korea and Iran really don't have any developed relations with each other. However, with the threat of Iran attacking and North Korea launching 20 missiles in one day, it's entirely possible the countries might get ideas. US morale is low, but war in both countries threatens resources the United States needs. A war between Iran and Saudi Arabia would jeopardize the oil market, and war between the Koreas threatens the silicon market. However, both countries have conditions that historically do not favor the United States, with domestic pressures enacting on their leaders. It would make some sense for both countries to act in relation to each other, even if they don't communicate directly. Despite the United States having allies in the region, both countries also have their trump cards, with North Korea having tentative relations with China and Iran with Russia. With both countries acting in relation to each other, the scale of potential conflict threatens to get out of control, especially with Iran supporting numerous terrorist groups in northern Africa and along the Arabian Peninsula. We haven't seen any evidence that both countries are communicating in any real capacity, but I fear that this happy accident may give both leaders some ideas, emboldening them. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. We strive to take complex aviation topics and condense them into something digestible by the average viewer. If you enjoy this content, then please subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy your dance with the angels.